The compound gate had not been opened in 10 years. Adrian Okafor stepped out of his black Mercedes G-Wagon and stood on the red laterite road outside the iron gate, the Lagos evening settling around him like something that had been waiting. He was 42 now, and the weight of that number lived in the set of his shoulders, in the early gray that had crept into his low-cut hair at the temples, in the way he stood, still, composed, like a man who had long ago learned to keep everything important somewhere deep and interior where no one could reach it. The compound walls stretched on both sides of the gate, old colonial stone eaten by years of bougainvillea, the brilliant pink flowers almost violent against the gray surface. Palm trees on the inside had grown past the wall and leaned outward, heavy and untended. The ornamental fountain just visible through the gate bars had cracked straight down the middle and gone dry, red dust settled in its basin like a grave offering. He had come to sign papers. His lawyer had arranged everything. The property agent was coming Friday. After that, this compound, this 5-bedroom colonial mansion in the old money part of Ikoyi that his father had built in 1987 and that Adrian had brought his wife to as a bride, would go on the market, and Adrian Okafor would finally, permanently, be done with the ghost of this place. He reached into his coat pocket for the gate key. That was when the light came on. 3rd floor. The east bedroom. The window that had once been theirs. Adrian's hand stopped moving inside his pocket. He stood completely still. He told himself it was the gatehouse security sensor, a fault in the old wiring, a trick of the fading harmattan light that turned everything amber and unreliable at this hour. He told himself several things in the space of 3 seconds, and none of them held. Because a silhouette appeared in the window. A woman. Standing perfectly still, looking down at the gate. The key fell from his fingers onto the laterite road. He did not notice. His chest had done something it had no medical explanation for, a full stop, a seizing, a refusal. The shape of her. The particular way she held her head, slightly tilted, the posture of a woman surveying something she had thought about for a long time. He knew that posture. He had memorized it across 8 years of marriage, and then spent 10 years trying to forget it, and clearly he had failed at that completely. Adiz. His wife. The woman whose funeral had been held at All Saints Church in Ikoyi on a Tuesday morning with 300 people in attendance, including the governor of Lagos State. The woman whose grave he visited every year on the 14th of March at Vaults and Gardens in Ikoyi, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with nothing but himself and 10 years of questions that had no one left to answer them. The woman who was dead. The light in the window went out. Adrian Okafor stood in the orange Lagos dusk for a full minute before his legs remembered what they were for. He had been 32 when he married Adiz. She was the second daughter of a retired civil servant from Enugu, sharp and warm and possessed of a particular kind of beauty that did not announce itself immediately but compounded over time, so that men who had known her 5 years found her more striking than men who had just met her. She had a first-class degree in architecture from University of Lagos and opinions about everything, buildings, governance, food, the particular arrogance of Lagos traffic, delivered in a voice that was always certain without ever being unkind. Adrian's mother had suggested, privately, that an Okafor son should marry someone whose family had more standing. Adrian had introduced Adiz to the family at Christmas and watched his mother change her position within 40 minutes of conversation. The early years of their marriage were the best years of Adrian's life. He understood that now with the clarity that only distance provides, the way you understand the value of a season only after it has changed. They had lived in this Ikoyi compound, his father's wedding gift to them, and they had made it theirs. Adiz had redesigned the entire ground floor, knocked out walls, flooded the interior with light, planted the compound garden herself with the obsessive attention of someone who understood that the things you plant take years to show you what they are. They cooked together on Sunday evenings. They argued about architecture and politics and then resolved the argument in the way that people who genuinely love each other are fortunate enough to do. But Okafor energy had its own gravity. Adrian's father, Chief Obiora Okafor, a man who had built one of Nigeria's largest indigenous oil servicing companies from a single supply boat contract in 1979 and who regarded sentiment as a weakness that the market would eventually punish, had been preparing Adrian to take over the company since Adrian was 14 years old. By the time Adrian was 35, he was running the full operation, the upstream contracts, the downstream logistics, the government relationships that required dinners that lasted past midnight and trips to Abuja every other week and phone calls that could not go to voicemail regardless of what else was happening. He was present in every boardroom and absent from almost everything else. "You are building an empire," Adiz said to him one evening. She was sitting at the kitchen island, 8 months pregnant, her hands flat on the marble surface, her voice quieter than he would have preferred because quiet from Adiz meant something had moved past the point of argument and into something heavier. "But I married a man, Adrian. Not an empire. I would like to know if the man is still in there somewhere, or if he has been fully absorbed. Everything I am doing is for this family," Adrian told her. "For you. For this baby. You say that." She looked at him steadily. "But you have not slept in this house more than 4 nights in the last 3 weeks. You missed my last antenatal appointment. You cancelled our anniversary dinner to fly to Port Harcourt for a contract that your deputy could have handled." Her voice did not waver. "I am not asking for everything, Adrian. I am asking for enough. And I cannot tell any more if enough is something you are capable of." He had no good answer. He never did in those conversations. He reached for something, a promise, a future date, a compromise, but everything came out transactional, like he was negotiating a contract rather than speaking to his wife. And Adiz would go quiet in the particular way she had when she was deciding not to fight anymore, which was worse than fighting. The night of the fire, they had argued again. Worse than usual. She had found documents, stumbled onto them while looking for the compound's land survey papers in his home office. Documents relating to an oil field acquisition in the Niger Delta that had involved the forcible displacement of 2 riverside communities. 312 families. The legal filings were clinical, the compensation figures insulting, and Adrian's signature was on every page. "Tell me you did not know," Adiz said. She was standing in the doorway of his study holding the documents, and her voice was so still it frightened him. "It was handled by the legal team. I signed what the lawyers." "Adrian." Just his name. 2 syllables carrying the weight of everything. "Tell me you did not know what you were signing." He could not tell her that. She had set the documents down on his desk with great care, the way you set down something you no longer want to be holding. "I cannot pretend tonight," she said. "I am going to sleep in the east room. Adiz. Do not follow me." He went back to his desk and worked until nearly 2 in the morning. The generator hummed outside. The compound was quiet. At some point exhaustion folded him into his chair and he slept. He woke to the compound night watchman screaming his name. The east wing of the 3rd floor was burning. By the time the Lagos State Fire Service arrived, 2 rooms were destroyed. By the time the investigators finished their work, Adrian had been told that Adiz's body had been recovered from the east bedroom, identified by dental records, and that their son, 8 days from being born, had not survived. That was what he was told. Those were the words that entered him and never fully left. His phone, when he finally thought to look at it, showed 3 missed calls from Adiz's number. Timestamp 12:51, 1:04, and 1:17 a.m. He had been asleep. He had not answered. Chief Adrian Okafor had handled the arrangements, the burial, the official statements, the quiet management of what a grief-stricken son was too shattered to manage himself. He had been, in those weeks, what Adrian had always needed him to be, efficient, decisive, completely in control. Adrian had returned to work 6 weeks later because there was nothing else. Okafor Energy needed him, the contracts needed him, the government relationships needed him, and needing to be needed was the only thing standing between him and the particular darkness that had taken up residence in his chest on the night he stood in the compound and watched the east wing burn. He gave money, to the communities his father's company had displaced, to maternal health organizations, to causes Adiz had believed in, understanding with a private and honest clarity that it was the penance of a man who had lost the only thing that mattered and could not figure out what else to do with his hands. He never came back to the Ikoyi compound. Until tonight. Until the light in the window. He did not call the police. Something in him, the same instinct that had made him a good negotiator, the ability to read a situation before imposing a framework on it, told him that what was inside that compound was not a threat. It was a reckoning. Those were different things and they required different responses. The front gate was unlocked. Adrian pushed it open and walked into the compound. The evening air smelled of red dust and something cooking, egusi soup, he thought, or something close to it, and the smell hit him with a physical force he was not prepared for because it was the smell of this compound as it had been when it was alive. When she had been alive. The ground floor lights were on. The compound had been swept, he noticed, the laterite cleared of leaves, a pair of small canvas shoes sitting just inside the front door, laces trailing. Small shoes. He stared at them. From somewhere inside the house, a child laughed. The laugh of a child entirely at ease, entirely present, with nothing in the world to be cautious about. Adrian walked through the corridor he knew by heart even after 10 years, past the sitting room Adiz had redesigned, past the bookshelf she had built into the wall herself on a Saturday afternoon while he was on a call to Abuja, past the framed print of a Yusuf Grillo painting she had insisted on hanging at the end of the corridor even though he thought it was too large for the space. It was still there. He stepped into the kitchen. The boy was sitting at the kitchen table with a mathematics textbook open in front of him and a half-eaten mango in his hand, the juice running down his wrist in the unbothered way of a child who has not yet learned to be self-conscious. He was perhaps 10 years old. He had dark warm skin and his father's deep-set dark brown eyes set in a face that carried high cheekbones that had come from somewhere else, from someone else, and a strong jaw still soft with the particular unfinished quality of childhood. He sat with his spine straight, chin up, in a way that had nothing performed about it. It was simply how he held himself. The boy looked up. "Who are you?" he asked. No fear. No alarm. Just a direct, measuring question from a child who had been raised to look at things clearly. Adrian's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "His name is Adrian." The voice came from behind him. Low and steady and familiar in a way that went past thought entirely, past the 10 years of grief and work and purposeful forgetting, and landed somewhere so deep and old that Adrian felt it in his sternum before he understood it with his mind. He turned. Adiz stood in the kitchen doorway. She was 39 now and she carried it the way certain women carry time, not fighting it, not performing indifference to it, simply present in it. She wore no jewelry. Her natural hair was loose, coils past her shoulders. She was looking at him the way you look at the thing you have been rehearsing seeing for a very long time, which is never quite how you imagined it, which is always more. Adiz. His voice came out wrong. Too small. Too broken in the middle. Adrian. The boy looked between them with the careful focused attention of a child who understands that what is happening in this room is significant and has decided to pay complete attention. "Emeka," Adiz said, "go upstairs, please." "Is he the man from upstairs?" The boy studied Adrian for one final long moment with those dark brown eyes that were Adrian's own eyes in a face that was not, then he slid off the chair, picked up his mango, and walked out. His footsteps on the staircase were unhurried, the footsteps of a child who has been raised in a house where he feels completely safe. They stood in the kitchen and the silence between them had 10 years in it. "You need to explain this to me," Adrian said. His voice was controlled now. He had found the register he used in difficult negotiations, not cold, not aggressive, but utterly immovable. All of it. Every part. "I know. You are dead, Adiz. I buried you. I have visited your grave. I have," he stopped. The controlled voice was doing something unreliable. He steadied it. I need you to explain. Sit down. I do not want to sit down. Adrian. Please sit down. He sat. She sat across from him and folded her hands on the kitchen table in the way she had always done before saying something difficult, and she told him everything. The fire had been real. But it was not accidental. For days before it happened, a man had come to the compound while Adrian was in Abuja, well-dressed, composed, carrying a business card from a firm she did not recognize. He told her the visit was informal. He told her that Chief Obiora Okafor held her responsible for a softening in Adrian's appetite for the business, that her influence over her husband had become a liability the company could not continue to absorb, and that arrangements were already being considered. He did not use the word threat. He did not need to. Adiz had grown up in Nigeria and she understood precisely what was being communicated. She had called Mama Ngozi that same evening. Mama Ngozi had worked in the Okafor household for 11 years before she left under circumstances that the family had never fully explained and that Adrian had never thought to question. She had contacts. She had resources. She had, apparently, been waiting for a call like this one. We had 3 days, Adiz said. There was a woman, a Jane Doe from Lasith, she had no family, she had already passed. I know how it sounds. Mama Ngozi had contacts in the right places. The dental records. The identification. She paused. I had to die, Adrian. There was no other option I could see. And our son. His voice was very quiet now, the quietness that comes after the controlled voice gives up pretending. You were pregnant. Emeka was born 5 weeks later. In a private clinic in Ibadan. Just me and Mama Ngozi. A pause. He was early. But he was strong. He has always been strong. Adrian pressed both hands flat on the table. He needed to feel something solid beneath him. You have been in this house. The last 2 years. Before that we moved, Ibadan first, then Abuja, then Enugu where my aunt lives. When I heard you were planning to sell the compound, I could not, I needed to come back. I needed to make one decision from a place that was ours before I could think clearly about what came next. What came next? He looked at her. The grief and the fury were still fighting each other behind his eyes and neither was winning. Adiz, at any point in 10 years you could have. I tried. The 2 words landed and the room changed. Emeka was 4. I wrote a letter. I gave it to a man I trusted, not a courier company, a person, someone I had known for years, to deliver to your private address in Parkview, not the company address, your personal address. Her voice was steady but something underneath it was not. 2 weeks later that man called me from a hospital in Surulere. 2 of his fingers had been broken. He had been told what would happen to him, and to me, if he made contact again. The silence that followed was the loudest Adrian had ever sat inside. My father, he said. She said nothing. She looked at him and she did not need to say anything. He found Emeka upstairs in the library, the room Adrian had put his own books in as a young man, which still smelled of old paper and the particular staleness of rooms that hold knowledge no one has been consulting. The boy was sitting on the floor with a different book now, though Adrian noticed he was not reading it. He was waiting. Adrian sat down on the floor beside his son. It was an awkward descent for a man in a tailored suit and he did not care. He sat and for a moment neither of them spoke and the ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. Do you know who I am? Adrian asked. Emeka kept his eyes on the book. Mama said I might meet you one day. She said you didn't know about me. She said, a pause. He was choosing his words with a precision unusual in a 10-year-old. She said it was not your fault. The thing in Adrian's chest that had been clenched since he walked through the gate tightened further. She is right. I did not know. But I want you to understand something. He waited until the boy looked at him. If I had known, if anyone had told me you existed, I would have turned this whole country upside down to find you. Emeka considered this with complete seriousness. She cried sometimes, he said. At night. Not often. But I would hear it. Adrian had nothing to say to that. He nodded once. Are you going to fix it? Emeka asked. I am going to try. The boy's eyes were steady and direct. Trying is not the same as doing. No, Adrian said. It is not. Emeka looked at him for another long moment, assessing, measuring, running some internal calculation that Adrian could not see the working of. Then he looked back at his book. But he did not move away. He did not ask Adrian to leave. Adrian drove to his father's house in Victoria Island that same night. Chief Obiora Okafor's compound was 3 times the size of the Ikoyi property, the kind of Lagos mansion that communicated power not through elegance but through sheer scale. The gate alone was 12 feet high. The chief was in his private study when the steward brought Adrian in, sitting behind his carved mahogany desk in a dark embroidered igbada, the chieftain's staff mounted on the wall behind him, framed photographs with 3 different presidents arranged like evidence. He looked up from his papers with the mild irritation of a man interrupted. Adrian. You did not call. Adiz is alive. A pause. Chief Obiora's pen did not move. His face did not move. He had spent 50 years in the oil business, which meant he had spent 50 years in rooms where information could get you killed and the only safe response to anything was absolute stillness. That is not possible. She has been living in the Ikoyi compound. Adrian stepped forward until he was standing directly in front of the desk, close enough that his father could not retreat into the posture of a man behind furniture. With our son. My son. Who is 10 years old. Whom I have never met until this evening because you arranged for every attempt at contact to be destroyed. His voice was completely level. The fury underneath it was not. I need you to tell me how far it went. I need you to tell me who else knew and for how long. Whatever that woman has told you. Her name is Adiz. She is my wife. The word came out with a force that surprised even Adrian. And I am not here to negotiate, Baba. I am here to tell you what happens next. I am going to the Okafor Energy Board on Monday morning. I am going to present everything, the false identification, the forged records, the man whose fingers were broken in Suralere, all of it. And then I am going to resign as Group CEO and recommend an independent oversight committee. For the first time in Adrian's 42 years of life, Chief Obiora Okafor looked something close to afraid. Not the fear of a weak man, that would have been easier to witness. The fear of a powerful man who has just discovered that the instrument of his power has turned in his hand. You will destroy everything I built. You destroyed it. Adrian looked at the man who had shaped every ambition he had ever held and felt, for the first time, the strange and necessary grief of seeing that man clearly. I am simply saying it out loud. He walked out. The board meeting took place the following Monday in the Okafor Energy headquarters on Adeola Odiku Street, Victoria Island. It was not a clean process. Nothing real ever is. There were lawyers and raised voices and 2 board members who had been placed there by Chief Obiora and who fought the process with everything they had. There were journalists outside the building by Tuesday because someone had leaked, and the story that emerged in the business press, Okafor Energy billionaire resigns, cites governance failures, was only a fraction of the actual story, but it was enough. The full truth would come out in the months ahead, through the investigation that the new oversight committee initiated, through the legal proceedings that followed, through the careful patient work of accountability that Adrian would support with every resource he had. He walked out of the Okafor Energy building on Wednesday afternoon having submitted his formal resignation, his shares placed in an independent trust, his access cards returned to the security desk. He walked out into the Harmattan afternoon, the pale gold light hazy over Victoria Island, and he stood on the pavement and breathed. It was not relief exactly. It was something more complicated than relief. It was the feeling of a man who has been carrying a thing for 20 years and has finally set it down and is only now discovering how much of his posture had been shaped by the weight of it. There was a long road ahead. The legal processes, the consequences that had not yet fully arrived, the life he had built inside the empire that no longer existed in the form he had known. All of that was real and it was coming, and he was not pretending otherwise. But the stone had moved. He drove back to the Ikoyi compound that evening. Adise was in the compound garden, the one she had planted herself in the first year of their marriage, which had gone magnificently wild in the years since, the hibiscus enormous, the bougainvillea consuming the east wall in waves of orange and pink, the mango tree in the center so large now it threw shade over half the compound in the afternoon. She was cutting back one of the overgrown shrubs with a pair of garden shears, her natural hair wrapped in a head tie against the evening dust, and she heard his car and turned. He walked across the compound toward her and she watched him come and said nothing until he stopped. "I resigned this morning," he said. "The board has an independent oversight committee. The investigation is open. My father's lawyers are already working, but they will not be enough. The truth is going to come out fully and I intend to assist that process in every way I can." He paused. "I do not have the company anymore. I have personal assets, investments outside Okafor Energy, some property, but the empire is finished as I knew it. I want you to know that." Adise looked at him for a long moment. The evening light was doing what it does in Lagos at this hour, turning everything amber and gold and slightly unreal. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because you should know exactly where I am standing when I say what I want to say next." She waited. "I want to be here," Adrian said. "Not because I want to undo what happened, because I cannot. Not because guilt requires it, though the guilt is real. But because Emeka is 10 years old and he is extraordinary and I have already missed everything and I would very much like to stop missing things." He looked at her directly. "And because you are standing in this compound garden that you planted with your own hands and you are still the most certain person I have ever known, and I would like the chance, if you ever chose to give it, to be worthy of that. Slowly. Completely on your terms. For as long as it takes." The garden was quiet except for the sound of the compound generator and somewhere in the distance the perpetual motion of Lagos traffic. "I spent 10 years being angry," Adise said finally. "Not all the time. But it was always there underneath, even on the good days, even when Emeka made me laugh so hard I could not breathe. The anger was always there." She looked at the shears in her hand and then set them down on the compound wall. "I do not want to be angry anymore, Adrian. I am tired of it. I know. That is not the same as saying everything is fixed. I know that too." She looked at him for a long time. The amber light was in her eyes. "Emeka has been asking questions since yesterday evening that I have not known how to answer. Tell me what he asked and I will help you answer them." Something shifted in her face. Just slightly. The particular shift of someone who has been holding a door closed for a very long time and has just, quietly, turned the handle. "Come inside," she said. "I made pepper soup." He followed her across the compound and through the door. Emeka was at the kitchen table with a new book and a look of elaborate casualness that was completely unconvincing. He had clearly been listening for the sound of the door. He looked up when they came in and his eyes went to his father with the careful measuring gaze that Adrian was beginning to understand was simply how his son looked at things that mattered to him. "You came back," Emeka said. "I came back," Adrian said. "Mama made pepper soup. I heard. It is the correct pepper soup. Not the kind with too much uziza that tastes like a mistake." He said this with the authority of a child who has strong opinions about food and has been raised to express them. "You can sit down if you want." Adrian sat down. Adise moved to the stove and the smell of the pepper soup came forward in the warm kitchen air, crayfish and Scotch bonnet and the deep savory base of a pot that had been cooking for hours, and the ceiling fan turned overhead and Emeka went back to his book but kept looking up every few minutes to check, with the covert diligence of a 10-year-old who does not want to be caught caring, that his father was still there. Adrian stayed. He stayed through dinner and through the part after dinner where Emeka, with the careful casualness of a child floating a trial balloon, mentioned that he had been working on a rainwater harvesting system in the compound garden and that he had some questions about pipe diameter and pressure that his mathematics textbook was not helping with. Adrian said he might know something about that. Emeka said, with studied nonchalance, that he could show him tomorrow if he wanted. Adrian said he would be there. Later, after Emeka had gone to bed and the compound had gone quiet except for the generator and the distant city, Adrian and Adiz sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of Lipton tea and talked, not about the past, not about the future, but about Emeka. About who he was. The rainwater system. The mathematics grades. The best friend Felix who he defended with the loyalty of a small general. The way he went very quiet before saying something he had thought about for days. The way he laughed, which was entirely, with his whole body, in a way that had no self-consciousness in it at all. He has your stubbornness, Adiz said. He has your intelligence. He has both of our opinions about everything. Adrian laughed. It came out rough and unpracticed, like a muscle he had not used in a long time. Adiz looked at him when he laughed, just for a moment, just a look, and in that look was something he recognized from a long time ago. Not forgiveness exactly. Something more durable than forgiveness. Recognition. The recognition of 2 people who were made of compatible materials and who had, against considerable odds, found their way back to the same table. It was not a complete ending. There were legal proceedings ahead, difficult conversations ahead, the long patient work of rebuilding trust that could not be rushed or performed. Chief Obiora's reach was long and his lawyers were formidable and the full consequences of the decade of deception were still unwinding. There would be hard days. There would be days when the weight of what had been lost would press down on all 3 of them and the way forward would not be clear. But they were in the same house. They were sitting at the same table. And tomorrow morning, Adrian Okafor was going to drive back to this compound in Ikoyi and a 10-year-old boy who had his eyes and his stubbornness and the best of his mother was going to show him a rainwater harvesting system built from repurposed buckets and redirected zinc downspouts, and Adrian was going to pay complete attention, and the day after that he was going to come back again, and the day after that again, and again and again and again until coming back was simply what he did, until. It was not a gesture but a fact. Until his son knew it in his bones the way children need to know it, that the people who love you stay. The compound generator hummed. Somewhere in the Ikoyi night, a night bird called once and went quiet. Through the iron-barred kitchen window the sky above Lagos was its usual nighttime amber, the light of 10 million lives going on simultaneously, the enormous ordinary business of a city that had always had too much energy to fully sleep. Adiz wrapped both hands around her cup. Same time tomorrow, she said. Adrian looked at her across the kitchen table, in the house that had been a grave and was now, quietly and without ceremony, becoming something else. Same time tomorrow, he said. If this story held you from the beginning to this moment, do something for us, press the like button right now. It takes 1 second and it helps this channel put more stories like this one in front of people who need them. Subscribe if you have not yet, because we tell these stories every week and you do not want to miss what is coming next. And drop a comment below, tell us, what was the moment that hit you hardest? Was it the missed calls? The broken fingers in Surulere? Or the boy asking his father if he came back? We read every single comment. Every one. We will see you in the next story.